Which is where we have one compute node in the East, US East, and another one in US Central. I wasn't sure. Sorry about that. So my name is Jonathan Fite, and my current environment is an Azure managed instance. We also have Azure SQL Server and some Cosmos DB stuff floating around as well. For the managed instances, we use a failover group with one node configured in US Central and another in US East. We have all of our clients connecting to, well, both actually. Some of them connect to the listener name, that's what you get. And we have other things configured to connect to the specific side that they run on. Our primary application runs in Service Fabric nodes, and we have a gaggle of them in Central and another set in East, and they connect only to their respective node side. For testing that, or to high availability, we basically just every 6 weeks, couple of months, we fail over on schedule. We fail everything over, so we're practiced, we're ready for it. We know what breaks and what doesn't, and then we fix it. I think that's part of the most important part of any high availability disaster recovery scenario, is to actually do it and fix it and automate it so that it runs without issue. We also have on the back end, we have smoke test documents, which is how we verify that services are up and running, which is another important component. Our Azure SQL servers are configured the same way, failover groups and listeners. We have a machine, so a virtual machine based of integration services and reporting services. And these machines use data, I think it's data migration. Our systems team handles it. They do whatever they do to make, virtual machines be backup built on the other side. They basically click a button and it fails over into the other side with the same machine identifier, and everything works on that. For the Cosmos DB, unfortunately, there's nothing really you can do here. Their whole thing is like, hey, you need to restore a copy of this. Well, then you better have all the original documents for it. So since for us, those Cosmos DB containers are just that. We export data from our transactional system into that so that we can more rapidly serve our various external apps, which are very much read heavy. So we're not really terribly concerned with that. And that's it. The rest of the stuff, we have definitely designated some of our databases as shells. Things like our data warehouse and our cube. It's one of those things where, yes, it would suck. It would take time if it went down. But if we lost it, we have the code. We can recreate the databases, the tables, the schemas, and then it would just be reload the cube from source. and that would be what we would do. That's our backup plan for that.
Testing every 6 weeks fell over. How long do you stay at the secondary or the other sites?
We stay at the other site for 6 weeks or the 8 weeks. We fail over and commit to it. And that's helped us in the past. Sometimes we'll have software rollouts that go poorly, or Azure will have an issue. Um, it happens, right? So random CPU spikes, unapplied updates that are bouncing your failover instance every 5 minutes. Uh, and so we doing that, we know we can live on each side. We know what it takes, and then we fail back and forth. And for the most part now, it just works. We click the buttons and everything fails over and comes up like it should. Yeah. Our business is also kind of very much seasonal with student transportation. So during the off months, we do scale down the off node, basically scaled way down, so it's no longer able to support our business on that side. But that's just a cost saving measure that the business decides upon. Uh, there you go. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I was wondering, so what, do you have any automation tools that you use to help facilitate the failovers as part of a plan or failovers?
So the question was, if we had any tools to help software scripts automate that. Actually, this carried over in the business from when we were in our on-prem days. We don't like to use automated detection and failover. We have when we decide to fail over, that is a human decision that we make in coordination with the business. But we don't have anything to automatically do that. As far as the steps that need to be done, they're just written down, and it really is in Azure. Just click the button, says do the failover.
Do they do it through the portal then?
Yeah, to the portal. Yeah.
You said that the building is not accessible. Yeah, these, if you're here at the Three City Place, what floor are you on? And we'll send someone down to let you up. So you basically saying, did you use some scripts or you don't?
That's we do all automated. We don't trust for because everything is so tightly coupled in our environment to fail over. Like we can't have the service fabric nodes running live in central connecting to the east side when the managed instance is running over there. So for us, it's a manual decision. The human makes it, the human executes it. Decision to migrate to fail over from one side to another. Of course, on each side, so in the central, for example, in the central, when I say a managed instance, I'm really talking about the redundant set of compute that is a managed instance that Azure exposes to you. Internally, that's up to 2 or 3 nodes that so in the central, when I say a managed instance, that's actually 2 or 3 reserved compute there. So internally on that, I can see it sometimes in the logs where they'll move me around inside there. But for the most part, that doesn't cause us any issues. Applications should have retry logic built in, and it's very, very fast.
Sure, I'll share a few things. Sorry. Yeah, I was gonna mention that. Yeah, this is Dan. So I'll speak a little bit to on-prem, HADR. Um, I've worked several organizations that everybody likes to do it a little bit differently, but everybody has different sorts of infrastructure and deep pockets or not. So some organizations want to do it on the cheap, in which case your hands are kind of tied. But ideally, just like Jonathan was saying, you'd like to have practice your DR. So that means you need to have essentially like in terms of production hardware if you're doing it, with multiple data centers, on-prem, and have a big pipe between the data centers, some things that you kind of get automatically with Azure and other cloud providers. You have to do it if you're doing it on your own infrastructure. It's obviously a lot more expensive. And the ways I've seen SQL Server specifically done is that either with SAN replication in the case of traditional failover clustering, where you would have two local nodes for your failover cluster, and also have remote nodes with essentially storage level replication, where the remote nodes for disaster recovery will be offline except in an actual failover scenario, in which case they do a sync and split at the SAN level with the storage replication, and then bring the storage online and the other data center. Now, with availability groups, you have a lot more, options there, because of course you can, just replicate your database, updates either synchronously or asynchronously, depending on how much latency your applications can reach, can, tolerate. Some applications are very latency sensitive, where they have to run essentially next to each other. Kind of what Jonathan was saying, you have to, consider that stuff. But also with the some applications are not, where you can actually actually live with the application in one data center and database in the other. So in the context of DR, where you're talking mostly all or a majority of your services moving from one physical location to another, in that kind of a scenario, everything's going to be running in the same place when you're done. But getting there is kind of the challenge, because it takes a little while to, unless you have a lot of automation scripts and all, if you have a large, state of, database servers and applications. Um, let's see. Yeah, and scripting, in my opinion, is important to, help do it in a repeatable way, if at all possible. At least that's what we've been trying to do in the organizations I've worked with, and, have some pretty good success, and, some bumps along the road as well. And this is an iterative process, I think, in terms of testing your DR, because you're never going to get it right the first time. There's always going to be little hiccups there, and you can always just improve your process, so the next time you do it, you're not going to run into those same issues again. But all that said, your environment's always changing. You're always coming up with new databases or new applications, and things just change in general, and you have to manage all of that, and it's not an easy task. So the only way to really test it is to test it. Don't just plan it on paper and just cross your fingers and things, and hopefully it works, because you're going to avoid your surprises if you can actually do it for real. And how often you do it, I don't know. Some companies are under regulatory requirements where they have to do it and document it, and others are a lot loosey goosey and don't have to necessarily. So then it becomes more of a business decision rather than a compliance decision. I mean, typically we'll do DR testing. I've seen it done most commonly quarterly, um, but it's going to vary depending on the specific company. Um, Earlier in my career, we'd do it once a year because it was very expensive. and it was pretty much backup restore. That was your backup, you know, your the way we used to do in the olden days. But nowadays, you know, we can, you know, be a lot more real time with almost no data loss. You know, if you design everything right, and you know, it's just a question of, you know, how often you know, have time to, you know, to do that, because it does take people resources. I mean, people, you know, working weekends or evenings or whatever just to do a plan failover. But that does give you the confidence. So then when you have to do a failover for real, that, you know, you're confident that everything's going to happen and happen in the right way. Because I mean, I've seen some nasty things happen on sands, for example, where they go into protected mode, and lo and behold, you got it. You have a real disaster on your hands. You know, the only way to get out of it is to actually, you know, do a disaster recovery to a different environment.
So when you do, how long do you stay over at the other site?
It varies. Typically, no more than a week or two. Um, although, you know, there's no reason, you know, we couldn't, you know, do it longer. But at least that's where I'm at today.
Do you have any questions for Dan?
Is there a mistake, or rather, what is the most common or worst mistake you see in the process that people do for that?
The worst mistake I see in the process is lack of, mostly on the application side, with lack of, you know, having sound procedures for keeping, you know, all of the application servers in sync with the same code base and configuration. Depending on, you know, your infrastructure, you know, things like sometimes, like I used to work for a company where, you know, we had to make configuration changes to the application so that it could run in the, you know, remote data center. In other words, you have to change the server names, you know, and push that kind of change out. Other places I worked with, you know, we actually had the luxury of having, you know, modern load balancers where, you know, it's just a click of a button and it changes the DNS entry for you, you know, so you don't have to, you know, push any config changes. And even with the DNS changes, you know, you can run those with topology based, you know, names, so that if you're running in one data center, you're going to point to your local host, and if you're running in another data center, you'll point to those local hosts. You know, all through, you know, magic and smoke and mirrors with the DNS. You know, but you know that typically that's the higher end type, you know, equipment. In other words, deep pockets again. So it depends how big your organization is. You know, if you're a mom and pop shop, you're not going to be able to, you know, typically afford to do it the, you know, the Cadillac way with the DNS taking care of it all for you. You know, so that means you have to have good sound practices for pushing configuration changes. You know, you have the tools for doing so.
Any questions? Any other? Sorry, Sam, that there's a bit of an echo. It is what it is. I'm Julie Blomquist, and I work at SSM Healthcare. So we're a hospital system, hospital group with clinics, and we're primarily on-prem. We have started to go into Azure. I'm not aware of what applications are up in the cloud. What I support is on-prem, and the majority of our really important applications are all on-prem. I think they're starting to look at what we could migrate. The application that I primarily support is more of a reporting system. We get an ETL load nightly from the front end that's gathering the electronic health records from the hospitals, and it loads over into this reporting system nightly, and then it's up for available for reporting during the day after the loads. We use availability group where the servers are in two different locations. The one of the applications is not cluster aware, and from the vendor, the process is that we fail over to the other instance. The reporting is online. Meanwhile, we have to go to restore the databases back to a specific point in time. The two main databases must be kept in sync. There's a lot of system background tasks that are through the application layer that are running. You could see them running on the server, but they're not SQL jobs. They're like these background jobs from the application. So reporting would be available instantly. And then once you get the one database restored, you go after hours and you restore the other one so that they're both in sync and ready for the ETL to run that evening. On the other system, it's just a failover with the availability group. We do run an asynchronous node though, because it's a lot of data and it can't keep up. So if we fail over during one of the ETL processes, they would have to probably rerun the ETL to find out what is missing. But there's no other updates going on with the databases. So it's kind of isolated. We did, oh, I don't know, was it back in March? We did have a major SAN failure. So when you are in asynchronous and my application is in manual, so it's not even in automatic mode. What happens if you lose your SAN is everything is, I think it's in restoring mode, and you need to let the servers know, hey, this guy's it doesn't know who needs to be primary. And because it's manual, you can't go your nodes, your primary nodes down, and you can't go through to tell it to bring up over here. So you have to go to the secondary node and tell it, hey, you need to change your behavior and you're now primary. And there more than likely will be data loss. The time of day that ours occurred, we didn't have any data loss. And it was just running some scripts to change the behavior of the server. We do a planned DR once a year. The issues that I have is I have a lot of SSIS packages and they're in the file system, and the file system is on a Metro kind of storage that it's available at both locations. But what the problem that I have is the SQL Server jobs have to be created in both systems. The packages need to be accessible to both systems. And if now with the newer versions of SQL Server, if I was using the SSIS catalog, that could be replicated. I wouldn't necessarily have the issues, and I'm not sure. I think aren't jobs available to be replicated now? The MSDB. So Dan was saying that with the contained instances, you're now able to have the separate master and MSDB, but the information is shared. So like right now, I have to, anytime someone says, hey, I have a new extract job I want to put in place, I have to physically go and create that job on every node that's a secondary so that it's there. So the point of failure with RDR testing is I have 200 jobs on node 1 and oh golly gee, I only have 198 jobs on node 2. So somebody who was taking over the support when I was on vacation forgot to create the jobs over on the secondary nodes. When we do the plan DR, that's part of our process is to compare the jobs and make sure that we have the same jobs, the same logins. You know, it's also the permissions and on each of the nodes. So everything usually works very well in a plan DR, but there's a lot of manual setup and review prior to doing the DR failover. And in the case of when we did the emergency failover, everything worked out just fine. You know, we brought it up and everything was running. So we were very lucky. But again, this big system is used for reporting. It's not used for the patient's front-facing patient systems, you know, health at the hospital systems. It is considered critical because it does feed the financials, but because it's not patient-facing, it's got a little bit more leeway. I've worked at other companies where we've done a big DR rehearsal where we have a big boardroom together with a lot of people and we get a scenario read to us and it's all about how we make the decision. Are we going to fail over and go to an off-site? And back then it was going to a site where there were servers available and we would have to load all our software and do all the restores. You know, so the technology has really come a long way now with the availabilities, or we do have some which is doing log shipping still, but to have those possibilities, it's so much better than having to go to a blank server and load your OS and install your SQL. You're not going to be up fast in that scenario. So are there any questions? So the question is, how do you plan or how do you react? How do you work with a mishap which turns into the disaster, something that's not planned? Right. So in what I had in March, that was not planned. That was the gentleman from Dell EMC did something with the SAN and unplugged or broke something that he wasn't supposed to, and it was at our primary data center. And it wasn't just my system that freaked out. My system had more issues because I'm 58 terabytes. I have big data, so I had more issues. But in my case, I knew what I needed to do. I was on the road, and one of my teammates phoned in a critical ticket with Microsoft, and we had them on the line, and they walked them through. You know, when I got home, it was like, I was talking to them, explaining the situation. I knew what we needed to do, but it was another set of ears with an expert, and they're like, yes, these are the commands you need to run. And so we ran the commands, and it just changed my secondary into the primary, and everything was fine. But we had to fail because the sand was down. Right. I think it depends on the application. Usually there's management involved to make the decision to go to disaster, to failover. However, I don't know on, we have the front-facing hospitalization systems, those are all Unix based, and I don't know how those decisions are made, because that's pretty critical, and I don't know if that's automagical or not. But I know on a lot of these other systems, it's getting, it could be getting the director, the VP, or even the CIO involved to say, you have a period of time that you can troubleshoot and try to resolve your issue. And then it's like, okay, this application now needs to be brought up over here. Or is it something where you've lost your data center completely? Well, that's that. Yeah, you have to decide on what is an acceptable downtime for the application. And like when, you work trading desk or banking, that window is extremely small because every minute is, $50,000, $100,000, it's millions. It's changed. Right. Right. So on our planning side, our applications are tiered. So they've all gone through a process where they've discussed what is the application, what is its purpose, is it, is it patient facing, isn't it? How is it going to be designed based on their tiering? So a tier 1 critical application has some kind of replication availability group. It has something in place. We also use VM Metro, where we have a VM host in one location and one in another, and they're shared storage, but it's really, the storage is replicated between the two places. And that, yeah, so we do have that for some of the applications, but we try to do it at the design front end on the tiered application. There's rules like a tier 1, you only have so many minutes or whatever. And then when it's tier 2, maybe you have 4 hours, and it goes down the line to tier 3. So as far as what your downtime is, and especially if we have a data center outage, we know we have to get these tier 1 guys up first. And, if it's a day or two later for the tier 3, that's just the way it is.
Restoration or for half hour, and you're trying to catch the human ooze. Right, so I drop the table back. done. I worked at a place where we would test our restores into a secondary environment, right? So we let the developers develop against that, and guess what? Your database is always a day-old copy of production. Yeah, I've not done it any sooner myself. I mean, you could, right? I mean, you just stand up, you just restore the. You could continually keep log shipping up. I mean, just specify how tight you want that window to be. Yeah. But I mean, like, for the most part, right? So, like, let's say you drop a whole bunch of tables. If you're able to pull up yesterday's, and you say, I will fill in this data later, because I have the backups for it, I just don't have access to them right now. I mean, it's the difference between, like, are you functional? Is your business functional? And is it okay with a shell? So the other thing you could do is you create a snapshot of the database, right? An hourly drop and create. You've got to, well, no, not like an actual create. You wouldn't need a transaction log for that. You just create, no, on the server, you say create database snapshot, and it creates a copy of the database point in time. Oh, that's how long your log built? There, yeah, that's the other side of it. But that's just money. And a ton of other transaction stuff. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of downsides to that, but you're looking at the same thing, right? So you're like, okay, and there's software products out there that you can get that are supposedly able to look into the backup, and you can say, I want that table, and it will get it to you. I have used those. I'm in Azure, so all my backups are.
We've done part of our plan too is we do have database snapshots at the SAN level. So we're using EMC software to create a database snapshot. I have one that runs nightly at 8 p.m. It's not mounted. And then I have another one that I don't know if it's weekly. It's maybe during the day after the ETL runs, and that is mounted. And then Monday through Friday, we have a QA system for the developers, and that actually is created from a snapshot of production. So I've got a non-mounted version at one point in time, mounted on a backup server at one point in time. I have a QA. So I have the situation where somebody accidentally drops a table. I'm able to maybe do an export import, or somebody screws up a record. I'm able to maybe get that data from another flavor from another point in time, but there would be data loss. And it just depends on the point in time, because I'm fortunate in that I'm only at ETL at night. It finishes by, let's say, 4 a.m. And
How likely is that type of error to happen? How tolerant is the business to it? How much money are they willing to spend to make sure it doesn't happen, or to be able to recover from it? And that's part of our job. Our job is to go to the business and say, like, you want to solve this problem, this is what it will take. And they're like, we don't like that answer. We like a number lower to this. I'm like, okay, with that much money, this is what you can get.
right now, Dan's in the situation with trading. So it's millions of dollars a minute. But do your systems automatically fail over? Locally? For patching, well, my thing is if you have automatic, I mean, we have network blips. It's like, well, gee, it fails over then.
The split brain is where we are incredibly risk averse. We cannot tolerate a split brain on our databases. Cannot have that happen. And that's why we've done the human decides, the human makes the decision to fail over. You know, because you had the situation, right? Like your primary loses sight of the witness, but the secondary can still see it. And the secondary says, I'm primary now. And then half your clients are now trying to talk to the secondary. Both of them are accepting right. We can't tolerate that. We'd rather be down. And that's just the business decided that's what their risk tolerance was set.
I didn't think you could have read write on.
So
both
scenario
sides.
is
It depends on the application.
you have node A and node B and a witness, and node A is the primary, and it can't see the witness anymore. And it continues on saying, I'm the primary, I'm accepting read-write connection.
Putting in my transaction log.
And your secondary says, I can't see the primary anymore, but I can see the witness. So I'm going to tell the witness and I agree that I am now primary, because you set it to automatically configure and come up. And then now you have whatever network glitch you have, whatever clients can connect to the secondary and send data to it are going to.
So
And
you got
nothing
data in
stopping
both
them.
transaction logs, and you can't get it to synchronize.
You'll never get it.
You'll never get
It
it.
requires brain surgery to come back to that point. So that's our risk averse. That's why we've always had manual control, so humans can decide, like, is the primary really down or not? What's your risk factor? Have you practiced everything?
So your situation revolved around bad patching, a bad patch. Did and did they try to reboot? Did they try another reboot? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
The financial data isn't going to change. Although that would have been about the only hour. Okay. It happened in the maintenance window. Yes, it was coincidental. Yes, it wasn't my fault.
And are you running availability group or?
There's a level of which that's processing answer, and there's a level of which it's in mine.
Okay.
So, I believe that you rely to hyper
Okay.
instead of, I know, right? and it's like they read the brochure for Hyper-V and Windows servers, not the SQL servers, the little star that says never, ever, ever in SQL Server, you know. But
Dan, are you are you synchronous on between your HA at your local site and asynchronous to the? So there was a question asked if do you have issues with your secondary keeping up, assuming it's a cross-site secondary?
Sometimes we'll have like more detail.
S- s- So
You know, we do have databases with appropriate, RPO for each one, so it's going to depend on the specific application for the most part.
see, how do I summarize that? So in general, they don't have issues with the secondary keeping up. Occasionally with a large ETL process, they'll get behind a little, but they'll just wait for it if it's a planned DR, or you'd have to redo the ETL if it wasn't a planned.
Right. And
DR.
obviously, if you ever get yourself in an inconsistent state, you just got to do what you got to do to.
Right.
You know,
But your unit of work must be really small to be able to keep up.
Yeah, I mean, usually, it's
It's a
it'll be
trade.
transactional, so OLTP type workload, unless it's really high volume, it's able to keep up with spikes.
And then Alex is asking, to deal with network blips causing failovers, have you tried tuning the cluster heartbeat setting, and have you come across a different solution to prevent such issues? We've tuned our heartbeat. I don't think we've run into anything else to do on that for the network blips.
For my side, we just decided our risk tolerance was so low, so averse. We just, like I said, went manual completely. In Azure, I get the advantage of the fact that all of the Azure data centers are connected with a multi-gigabit link. So I've caught latency, and it's almost always been the fact they were rebooting my secondary node at the time, and it just sort of flipped, usually during Azure issues. Otherwise, I never see any discrepancy between the LSMs. I do want to say also that the part of the process that I see that fails a lot is that you always have the same person doing your DR. Even if it's planned, you always have the same person who ends up doing it. Usually me, because I'm the senior, so I'm doing it. And really take advantage of the new guy. They write up the documentation, tell the new guy, follow this, tell me where it breaks. Right? Maybe be with them, but you want the new guy to follow the documentation. He's going to tell you where it's not clear, where it's wrong. He's going to help you really improve that process, because in an absolute worst case scenario, I'm going to have to be able to point one of our systems. They follow those steps, and that's how you bring it up. Or worst case scenario, like I get hit by a bus and somebody else does it. But you also need to do the same thing with your, that's, the DRs, you're big, moving from one node to another. But test your lower level stuff, restore from your production environment into a UAT or a dev environment. What does that look like? Practice that, take advantage and time that, right? It needs to work. Things, what is it? DBA tools, PowerShell, scripting engine is great for keeping nodes in sync. If you can figure it out. It's complicated.
I've used we have a license for Redgate Compare, not the data comparison, but the SQL Compare. So I've used that to help identify like logins and different objects, which may be different between some of the nodes. I mean, the databases are kept in sync, but it'll help me with items in the non-synchronizing databases.
Weekend DR exercises where we fail over, we try to bring all the applications up on the secondary node, see what works, what doesn't work, and then you're going to fail over to the primary again. It's not necessarily a true DR, but it's an exercise. So that's a process that's still followed now that we're shifting to more Azure. This was all on-prem, basement of the room across the building across the campus was where the servers were, and then we'd have the other servers somewhere else. Very on-prem type of a makeup. More recently, I've shifted away from core DBA functionality, and now we're in the Azure environment. Is that a process that's still followed? What's the best practice as far as exercising or practicing disaster recovery?
Do the same thing, and I think on-prem or companies that don't want to invest as much into it, you have your secondary side is like, yeah, we technically can run there, but it's last generation hardware because we cycled from primary data center to secondary, and then on full that into tertiary or whatever. But in Azure, there's no difference between I spin up a 40-core managed instance in Central. It's the exact same hardware in East. So I think you should actually fail over. We do fail over from one side to another, and that catches all of your differences. Like, oh, we changed this network configuration over here. We forgot to change it over over on this side. It catches your SQL agent jobs, but you have the same problem where jobs don't synchronize. DBA tools for it. If you need to be able to fail over to the secondary environment in Azure, I would say practice and just do it. Fail over because in theory you're running in Central and East is not much latency difference.
I still think there's some of that out there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, a lot of people are still just doing disaster recovery exercises. They just practice it. They don't actually stay over there. It's expensive.
Oh, I completely agree, and especially if you're on the cloud, you have to maintain keep the hardware up to date from all sides. It takes a definite commitment from the business to decide, yes, we are going to be able to have high redundancy and actually execute a successful failover when we need to. And I think that comes down to nature. Our business, we do student transportation, and so if the parents and the school district lose track of where those kids are, because we're using technology to tell them exactly where those kids are. If they're like, why can't I access that site? It really makes me nervous about your company.
So Alex is asking another question. Does anyone use Zerto or some other VM replication technology? Just curious if anyone has experience using that technology for DR and what, if any, issues they have run into.
I've used that sort of technology before. Usually there's a difference between the operating system drives, which we would let the systems people like, okay, you want to synchronize the C drive and the C and D or whatever for the SQL servers. That's great, but I did not trust the fan level replication, especially crossing the data center with network hiccups. Like the fact, especially you're striking like 5 or 10 drives in the fan. So how much did it really freeze, catch all of the bits in perfect consistency? Or am I going to get over there and find that I've got still got to do a restore? We just didn't trust the fan replication for the data drives.
Well, that's kind of like what we do with the Metro, because I think the Metro, they're saying that it's a shared drive between the two servers, but it really isn't. When it's going to two different data centers, it's really doing SAN replication.
But I just don't trust them to be able to catch the an MDF file inactivity, all the bits in perfect order.
It may have changed in the last 8 years. I've just always leaned for either availability groups or make sure your backups and restores are practiced and tested.
They use they use Zerto for his their BI environment, since all the databases are in simple recovery, and their SLAs allowed for quite a bit of data loss in the reporting environment. So
Absolutely. Whatever makes it easy for you, whatever the business is comfortable with, but it is definitely important that the business is aware of all of the RPO and the RTO, and like if they expect it to be 0 downtime, then not, then that's a problem. But if they're aware of this system is, give me 2 hours when this is down and I can bring it back 100%, 0 data loss, or have 5 to 10 minutes, whatever the situation is. But they have to be aware of it. Part of the job.
So we use Avamar for our backup software at the server level, and our server admins are required once a month to do restores. Just on different servers, it's just arbitrary, they're cycling through the servers they're responsible for, so that they're comfortable doing the Avamar restores, restoring the files, whatever it is. It's we don't use that for the MDF and LDFs at all, but they could be restoring a BAK file or a transaction log file or something like that. Some of our systems write to data domain, which is just SAN storage for the SQL backups, and some write locally to the server, and then the Avamar software takes it off the server, and then that goes to a different location in the data center, and then that gets replicated off into, I think, Wisconsin now, a different region. So when they practice these restores, it just depends on where it's coming from and what the speed is. So when you're coming from Wisconsin, it's slower. They just, notice that. But the server administrators are regularly practicing file restores in essence, is what it is.
And if you've not practiced and actually restored your backups, you don't know.
Right, and I think practicing your database restores and really understanding, restoring the full backup, restoring the transaction log, or, oh, this system has a differential, so then I restore the differential and then I go to the transaction log. What order of events? I've had it before where I go to restore a transaction log and I get that wonderful message saying that your LSN is not in the right, it's too late or too early or whatever, it's not the right LSN number. And I have to think about, okay, what am I doing in the wrong order? Or my full backup was still running when this transaction log was being taken, that kind of a thing.
Yeah. Or somebody took a full backup and broke your chain.
Oh, yeah.
They did it off somewhere else and now you don't know where it is.
Now, what I discovered on one of my, so I do these big upgrades twice a year with the vendor software. And when that occurs, I have to take the databases out of the availability group that's required by the software vendor. So then I have to spend a weekend putting it back together. And I discovered on one weekend, and it's, like I said, I'm, 60 terabytes. I'm large. It's a multi-day process. And I'm on the home stretch of the restores, and I get one of these messages about, the transaction log not being the right value. And I'm trying to figure this out. I call in a critical ticket because I've already spent 2 days on this. And it turns out that the SAN snapshot, which ran in between, the full backup file and the transaction logs, everything, there was a SAN snapshot, and that screwed up that that chain, the database chain. And I was unaware of that. And I was like, and usually when I do my restores, those sand snapshots aren't occurring on the weekends, but for some reason we picked different days or something, and there was a sand snapshot. So it's all a lessons learned, but not when you're really trying to restore something. It's just like, I've got 2 days into this, and it's like, great, start over. Because my backup's now 2 days old. I need to have another full backup, 5 hours.
I wrote confiscate from that.
Here, give him the microphone.
So I ended up writing PowerShell scripts that would take the backups, name them properly, get them together, and write another script that just restored that whole set. And then on the other machine, it would run that script. So within the day, I would know every day, when it came back up, it would run a query that looked at its own sanity and emailed if something was wrong or something like that. So every day I would know that the prior day's backup was restoring. And there was a nice bit of security in that of knowing that the backup has been restored and checked itself out and was good. Now, I wish I had such things, but
What about running the DBCC check DBs? I'm having extreme difficulty on this large system. Because of the ETL that runs every night, my DBCC check DB takes over 1 day, and the system, the memory, I guess it is, can't handle the check DB running along with the ETL. The check DB fails. So I have gone to running the check DB on my QA snapshot. That's done on Friday, and my DBCC runs. It still runs more than 1 day, but it's able to get through. So I know weekly that I've got a good clean backup. I was trying to run it on my snapshot that's mounted to the VM, and it doesn't have the resource. My other servers are physical with 96 cores and 3 terabytes of memory, and the VM's nowhere near that. I mean, it doesn't even have 100 gig of memory, and it's taking between 3 and 4 days for the check DB. So I'm trying to find, and I've been researching online, how to figure out what I need memory wise, because I'm pretty sure I look at the activity in Task Manager, and I could tell it's not the CPU. And they're looking at it on the VM side, and they're saying it's not the CPU. So it's got to be the memory that's causing me
The rule of
the
thumb
issue.
for index is like 1.5 times the size of your largest index.
I read that.
Stable. Yeah, check DB, I would imagine you'd be pretty close. But yeah, if you're not doing check DB on your primary, then all you do know is that your backups are good, which is good, but you still don't know on your primary if you're having storage corruption. You got to run on the primary.
Yeah,
Well, at least once in a while. Up to the business. If you have to stop I don't know how feasible it is to stop the ETL for a day or two to let that finish, but
no. But the other question that I have is when we do monthly patching where we're failing over, and when you fail back, if you look in the SQL log, it tells you it's going through. I guess it's a cursory check DB because it says.
yeah, it's very, very cursory. Yeah.
I had a bad hit on hard drives that we didn't trying to find our earliest. Oh, sorry, I had a bad hit on a hard drive, and so you find yourself trying to find the earliest backup that you have that is late enough to be something, but that would actually run a backup at that. Trying just desperately to
Yeah, you're right. It's difficult if you do have a bad sector and you have it's your backups are bad in general. Your snapshots are bad. It's the snapshot works, but you don't know that there's bad. And the only thing that tells you that is the DBCC. I tried using Ola Hallegren script to work through check table, just doing, trying to say, okay, on Monday we do these, on Tuesday, and I couldn't get the check table to do a reasonable number of tables in a day. So, and
Given
then
your,
again, I wasn't running it on production because it interferes with, you're taking resources away from the production environment.
yeah, but it does directly contribute to uptime, right?
Right.
And maybe you just start at A and just work and just have it just work through is like runs for 2 hours every day.
Do a Roomba style, you're comparing sections with sections.
Yeah.
Randomly.
Which something is definitely better than nothing.
I feel like in our situation, if you want to do specific things, it's
I did can't remember what I was doing with indexes or something, but I was backups. I was controlling which servers did which backups and timing them so I didn't overload my SAN. And I would group them by server size, total size of backup required on each server, and I just played checkers until I had roughly equal, triangles. It's like make them all fit until it could. So you could look at your table sizes and, arrange them so that, divide by 7, and just fit whichever ones fit. I'm going to do, 60 terabytes. I'm going to do 10 terabytes of tables this day and 10 terabytes this day. And maybe on one of the days, it's just one table. I don't know. That's one way to tackle it anyways.
So Alex is writing about the CheckDB that's showing up in the SQL error logs after failbacks and stuff. And yeah, it's really not. He's saying that it's the last time the CheckDB ran, and I didn't think so, because it's
doing something. It's doing something, but
it's-
it's very, very.
it's doing a cursory kind of a check. It could just be doing an open and close, just like some of your backup verify. It's just opening and closing.
Yeah. Can I access the metadata,
Yeah.
metadata tables, and is that all that it takes? So. Yeah.
So what do you do, Dan? Do you run it on the second node at the primary location? So just so everybody knows, if you have readable secondaries, you must have SQL licensing for them, or they must be on licensed hosts. And if you have 3 nodes where you have, 2 for, let's say, HA at the primary and then 1 for a DR, you can get your DR node for free, but you have to license 2 of them.
Yep.
Yep. So and on most of these kind of really big HA systems, you are running enterprise. So the more it's extremely, and unless you're on VMs and hosts licensing, it's usually extremely expensive at the core level to do the enterprise. You know, if they say, yes, we want to, let's go to 3 nodes, you're like, okay, that's fine. It's going to cost you $500,000 in licensing. On my system anyway. Right.
They bleed you
And
dry that way too.
we just were
Yeah.
looking at having a readable secondary. And they were testing, well, what if we take that 96 cores, like my QA server, make it be only 28 cores? You know, can the workload run over there? It's like, yes. And they're like, well, we decommissioned the server and we have 28 cores licensing. I'm like, that's fine. But if you read the fine print in the Microsoft document, it doesn't matter if you turn those off or not. If it is in the server, you have to license it. And they just had a really hard time understanding the black and white in the Adobe document or whatever. So I thought that was, I think that's always, they want their, even if you turn, now, if you open the server, if it's a physical server, if you open the server and you take those little dims out, you're okay. Because they know you can't, you know,
Yeah. if
turn
it's
them back on.
physically not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask if there's any more questions. Sam or Young, you guys have anything? You could type it into the chat. Oops, Alex is typing. I think that's very interesting, the trying to, what you're saying, plan for the unexpected, you know, when you, and how do you, when do you make that call to, hey, it's 10 minutes, let's just do a this is where we could get to, let's just start the restore, because you've already, the restore takes an hour and you've already used 10 minutes of it, you know, in your troubleshooting. Yeah, if you, yeah, all the data, yeah.
Oh, very, very much so. And there's nothing worse than the business expects you at the 0 day one level. No one talks about it. Yeah. Or they're like, this app I consider to be tier 1 priority. And I'm like I thought that was the second level.
I can turn it off for 2 hours. But it's not.
No, if you turn it, if it's off for 2 hours and nobody calls,
Right.
whoops, that's a question for me, Alex. So I'm the one who, I have a SAN level snapshot that's presented to my QA server, and I weekly run the check DB against that. So it is a snapshot of one that is attached to the QA server? Yes. If so, that wouldn't still count as a good check DB, since the LUN is the block level copy of the storage on the, yeah, that's true. It's a snapshot of the primary storage. So it really would count. he's saying it really would count as a check DB like on production because it's on the same, it's a snapshot of the production LUNs. The snapshot's presented to the QA server, but it's going, they have the pointers back to the original blocks.
Oh, I see.
So that's a
Okay,
good
so the
point.
production-
That's a good point, Alex. Yeah, I think you're right on that.
Yes. Yeah, because you're literally looking at the same,
It's the same
Block.
blocks. You're
Same
looking
block.
at the same blocks.
that would count. Then your QA one would count. All you're missing out on is the difference between there.
It would be
It's
nice
better than
though
nothing.
if I could, well, and what Morales talking about is he's saying he can get me a list of 250 tables and I could try to do the tables, check table on those 250 and see if it's less than a day. Some of the tables are extremely large.
If you have to stretch it to 2 weeks, or even if you're like, it takes me a month to get all the way through all of them, it's still better than zero. And because I mean, modern hardware, the chances of you having like a hardware corruption, vanishingly small. I will freely admit that it's vanishingly small. It's not zero, but it's small.
Ironically, I think the old school RAID hardware that actually did parity checks more properly, you can split data into. I heard a lot of that. Relying on people using software.
Well, if there's no more questions, we're getting close to the 7:30 mark. I did want to bring up that Andy Meyer is here and he's with Doherty Business Solutions, and you want to give him the microphone and oh, come on. We just really want to thank them for hosting our meetings and supplying us with dinner or lunch. And if you just want to wait a second and let Andy talk a little bit about Doherty and
Yeah, sure. So
what their business is.
sure. We are a consulting shop based out of St. Louis here. Started in '85, I believe it was. So been around for quite a while. We have consultants in software engineering, data and analytics, such as myself, business analysts, and project managers. So, please let me know. Appreciate it. And even if you're not looking, keep looking at the website for these meetings. They're once a month. The next one, I believe, will be over lunch. And hosted here. So we hope to see you here.
Yeah, we do try to network at these the in-person part, and we are still doing the Teams meetings so that everybody can attend. Quite a few people can't make it into the meetings, but we really appreciate it if you can try to come in person and check us out. We really appreciate you attending tonight and asking your questions. Alex, you get the award for just really participating. We really appreciate it. And like I said, I think it's November 14th, and Jonathan Fite here, he's going to be talking about the lessons learned with the migrating to Azure. So I think it's been, he said, 3 years since they moved.
Yep, we migrated from an on-prem environment into Azure 3 years ago, and we've been there ever since. So I've got some lessons learned and long-term lessons learned to add to it.
Well, thank you again for attending, and hopefully we'll see you next month. Let's see, I'm going to do this, and stop the recording.